practicing the principles in uncertain times. We have so been looking forward to spending this time with you. We're going to talk about two main things tonight. One is how we can use the spiritual principles we know to stay centered and at peace and aligned with spirit. But we also want to talk about what, if anything, is ours to do in the world the way it is right now. How can spiritual people show up? So I am joined by a stellar panel of ministers. You probably read their bios when you signed up to watch this. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves in any way they like. Michael, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. My name is Michael Gott. I'm the senior minister at Unity of Houston. I have the great honor of succeeding the legend, Howard Caesar, in that pulpit, and we're doing amazing things in our community. We're asking this question a lot. You know, how can we show up? How can we bring our principles to bear in the world? I really love, Ellen, that you've framed this around the 5 basic principles of unity, because every time I read them, every time I teach them, I'm sold again. I love this work. Thank you for including me.
Yeah. Sheila.
Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sheila McKeithen, and I'm president of the Universal Foundation for Better Living, founded in 1974 by the Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman. I am also the senior minister of the Universal Center of Truth for Better Living, one of our ministries in Kingston, Jamaica. I'm so grateful to be here tonight. I am a truth student. I have been just a fan of this teaching since I was introduced to it back in 1982. And I just want you to let you know that I too am a fan of the 5 principles and the teachings of New Thought, because these teachings actually saved my life. I was given less than 6 days to live, and it was only through the use and application of these spiritual principles that I'm here today. So I want to thank you, Reverend Ellen, for having me tonight.
Glad you're here. Wendy.
I'm delighted to be here as well, Ellen. My name is Wendy Craig-Purcell, and I'm the senior and the founding minister of the Unity Center in San Diego, California. And like my esteemed colleagues have said, I too love going back to the basics and the core of our teaching, the opportunity to remember and renew ourselves around these principles. And I am delighted that we in Unity and in the New Thought movement are really opening up and looking at how do we, as conscious beings committed to a spiritual path and teaching, show up in and around the very real issues in the world. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you all so much for accepting the invitation. I'm Ellen Debenport. I'm the Vice President of Publishing for Unity World Headquarters. You may know that Unity started as a magazine, basically, a magazine and a prayer ministry. And we still publish magazines, books, booklets. We have a podcast network, and of course, everything digital, websites, emails, social media. And so I work on the messaging. What is it we are actually saying when we want to share these spiritual principles with the world? I've been doing that for 3 years, and it is fascinating all the time. We had a few tech rehearsals for this, and so just to be transparent, I have notes over here. You'll see me looking at them to keep us on track and on time. Believe me, it's better if I don't ad lib. So we're going to be talking about spiritual principles. A principle is a law. It's like 2 + 2 = 4. That's a mathematical principle. It applies the same way to everyone, everywhere, all the time, and always will. And if you add 2 + 2 and get something besides 4, you need to work on how you are practicing the principle. It's not quite as cut and dried when it comes to spiritual principles. And so we talk all the time about what they mean and how to practice them. They're not ours. You may hear us refer to Unity's 5 principles. They are ancient spiritual teachings. They've been around for thousands of years, and they show up in all of the world's religions. The reason we refer to them as Unity's 5 principles is because 30 years ago, Connie Fillmore, the great-granddaughter of the Unity founders, was asked to write a little something about Unity's teachings. And she brilliantly, in my opinion, boiled it down to 5 bullet points that we call the 5 principles. No one was more surprised than Connie when they caught on and are still being used throughout the New Thought movement. But they capture pretty much everything Unity teaches and everything New Thought teaches. Just very briefly, they are: God is all there is, human beings are divine, our thoughts have creative power, prayer and meditation keep us aligned with spirit, and the 5th one is to live the truth we know. These 5 principles are perfectly suited to these times. The first 4 are the centering principles, and the 5th one is about what then do we do? What can we be for instead of against? Sometimes the action that we take as spiritual people is called spiritual social action. It just means get off the meditation mat and do something. So as you all were signing up to watch this evening, some of you got in touch with us and asked if this would be a political panel. We talked about it. Here's the thing, that is not our intention. And we know that people hear through their own filters, and nearly everything is considered political these days. But I would invite you to consider the difference between politics and current events. Current events is what's actually happening, the pandemic, the racial discussions and protests. Politics are opinions about it. So you will hear us talking about current events, but very much in spiritual terms of what is ours to do. How can we contribute from a consciousness of peace? How do we embody the principles we know? Does that make sense? And that's exactly where the 5 principles take us, and that's why we created this event. So just to give you an overview of the evening, our basic format, we've divvied up the first 4 principles, and each one of us have a principle to talk about for about 5 minutes, and then we'll all talk about it and how it is applied in our lives and in the world. And we're saving principle 5 for the whole second hour. Live the truth you know, or take action. For that hour, there is basically no structure. We'll talk about what we think about principle 5, and we will also be taking your questions through the chat box. So Michael Gott chose principle 1. Michael, some people say this is the only one that matters, that it encompasses everything. Over to you.
Thank you. I love this principle, and I do think it is the most basic of the 5 basic principles. It's the most foundational. It's the most encompassing. It says God is everything. There is nothing but one power, one presence. Even though I'm only doing a 5-minute talk, I'm a big fan of the 3-point sermon, so I'm still going to do 3 points here. And they're all framed in the absolute and the relative. But there is good news, bad news, and good news. And the first point is that in the absolute truth, it's all good. Good news, it is good. Emma Curtis Hopkins used to say, if you don't like the word God, just give it an ooh and it becomes good. And that is what we teach, is that the basic reality of reality is good. I love the way that it is, you wrote it today, Ellen, that God is all there is and is present everywhere. This is the force of love and wisdom that underlies all existence. That even though we see in the world of form that there are things that don't look like good, that don't look like God, divine intelligence, divine power, divine creativity is under everything. That is the truth, that it is good. We sometimes get a reputation for being sort of religion light or spirituality light, and that's not what this principle actually says. We have a member of our community, I'm going to call her Sherry, that's not her name, but her sister-in-law was going through a rough patch there was some addiction and marriage problems, and she came to stay with Sherry and her husband, and her husband's family came from a very fundamental Christian background, and they were a little mistrustful of this church that Sherry was taking her family to, and the mother-in-law said to the sister who was coming to stay, said, don't let her take you to that love everybody church. Like that would be a bad thing, to go to a church that loves everybody. And we laugh about it. And really that's our ideal. We want to be a spiritual community that sees this ever-present good all the time, everywhere. And here comes the bad news. In the relative reality, we don't live it that way all the time. Why? Because well, here I want to say this. If we have incarnated as an individualized expression of this one infinite power, then we can't, by definition, embody and hold and comprehend the whole, the infinite, because it is what? Infinite. So we are here for a unique perspective, a unique experience of the divine life as an individuated expression. And so our perspective is never complete. It's always partial. In other words, you're always wrong. I mean, in some ways, you're always going to be seeing it from an incomplete angle. And so as we are seeing the world, we're not always seeing it right. And so all of our pain, all of our fear, all of our sense of unworthiness comes from a lack of seeing the truth that is here. We haven't yet evolved or healed to the level of consciousness to fully feel it, live it, embody it, and know it. So it's okay that we all have work to do around this principle. It's okay that we're all healing and growing. The false beliefs, the error thoughts that are in place, this is something that everybody who has a body is dealing with. I like what Edwene Gaines says about forgiveness. She said, here's the test to see if you have forgiveness to do. Are you breathing? It's like that all of us have work to do here. Jesus talked about it. It's recorded in the 7th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. And it's this famous teaching where he talks about don't judge or you will be judged in the same way. Before you take the speck out of your brother's eye, check out the 2x4 in your own. He was talking about this very high concept, psychological concept of projection 2,000 years before Carl Jung. And in A Course in Miracles, it says this. I love this passage. One second, here we are. Each one of you see you placed within the holy circle of atonement or leave outside. I'm sorry, I'll try that again. Each one you see you place within the holy circle of atonement or you leave outside, judging him fit for crucifixion or for redemption. If you bring him into the circle of purity, you will rest there with him. If you leave him without, you join him there. To accuse is not to understand. Do you get it? That when we have judged someone else as being less than divine, and another situation, if we have seen anything in the world as being less than this embodiment of principle one, that God is everywhere present, we have taken ourselves out of that being in the presence. My partner John is a wonderful teacher of the course, and we did a workshop at Unity one time, and we stood in circle, and then we were going to call to mind someone that we had a less than holy thought about, and then we asked someone to represent that person, and then we looked at them, and then they immediately took us out of the circle. And it was such we got that embodied experience that when I'm judging another, when I'm standing in judgment of something in the world, I have taken myself outside of unity consciousness. But here's the good news, the last point. There is actually good news in the relative experience of incarnate reality as well, because we can remove the plank from our eye. We can heal our false belief. We can get better. We can grow and evolve and heal in our consciousness. And that's what we're here to do. The way we have to do that is in these certain uncertain times, in this polarized culture we live in, we have to question our own assumptions. We have to question our own biases. That is the only way that we're going to grow in these times and bringing our principles to bear in this current event. These current events we're in is by knowing that our perspective is partial, and we can begin to break up some of the race consciousness was an old metaphysical term, the stuff that just got downloaded into us without our permission by our family systems. And if we begin to do that work, here's what happens. At first, we may feel very insecure and unsettled because we thought we knew the way the world worked, and it doesn't work that way. But if we go back to the first bit of good news, there is divine power, divine creativity. The evolutionary impulse of life itself is seeking to be revealed. And where is it revealed in your life? in those broken places, in those places that need healing, in those places where we need to release the false belief and step into a greater reality. We're going to talk about it more in the discussion tonight, that at our church, we have created 4 years ago an initiative called Healing the Heart of America, and this is exactly the work we're doing. We are individually asking ourselves to question our biases and assumptions. And we're also trying to do it as a community, and we want to do it as a movement as well, so that maybe someday we might actually live into really living up to being the church that loves everybody. Thank you.
I do want to hear more about that when we get to Principle 5, the actions that you're taking. So here's the question I get every time I try to teach Principle 1, that God is all there is and God is absolutely good. Someone raises their hand and says, then why is there evil in the world? You sort of touched on that, but judge not, and there are some things that need to be fixed, right? So tell me more.
Well, I think evil is because free will. I mean, that's it. People have the option to, like we all do, to live the truth of oneness or not, to live from a false reality. And where I come to with, where I can not judge the soul of the individual, but I can absolutely stand for or against behavior in the world. I can stand in opposition to hurtful, evil behavior. I can do those things and still know that these people, they just forgot, they just don't know that they really are in the image and likeness of the one.
Just as we all fail to live completely from our divinity.
Right.
Yeah. Wendy, Sheila, feel free to chime in.
As ministers, we do get that question when we're teaching this principle for sure. And Michael, I think you did a beautiful job of talking about the absolute and the relative, and just reminding people that we are living in a relative experience. But while we are living in that experience, to remember and to recognize that underlying it all, there is a presence, there is a power, call it spirit, God, the one, the name doesn't matter, but there is underlying it all a force of love, a force of good. And if we can hold that in the midst of the acknowledgement of the relativity and the hurt and the evil, or the expression of evil going on around us, then we can be a force for helping to bring forth that healing.
Sheila, thoughts?
We can always choose what we will be a vessel for, what we will make ourselves available for. I can make myself available for hate. I can make myself available for love. I can make myself available for beauty in the world. I can make myself available for that which is less than beautiful in the world. So the choice is my own. And so whatever we choose, I think it's important to remember that the presence of God, the presence of good, does not change. We change, but the presence never does.
That's right. I think too that there is an ethic for the way we practice our metaphysics, isn't there? That we can use the power and creativity of God. We can choose to create anything we want, but we must harm no other. That's really the universal edict here. And when we see other people using their own creative power, and believe me, you can use it to do great destructive acts in the world, then that's not okay. We get to say that in this collective, this human culture that we live in, we actually get to stand for equality, for justice, for freedom for all people. And we can take a stand in the world based upon this first spiritual principle. And we can take action in the world based upon it. That just because somebody has the choice to use the creative power of God for evil, we also have a choice to stand for good, and even in opposition to those behaviors.
And I know we're going to get into this much more when we go into the fifth principle, but I think that we're seeing an evolution of how we're showing up in Unity and in New Thought, where we are not using the absolute as a way to shy away from the hurt of the world. And we are willing to step into that relative and do the work and be, as Sheila was speaking about, that voice for love, that voice for good, that we do have that choice, but we're not hiding behind it's all good in the relative world.
Right. And that's where I think people get confused when they're saying, oh, it's all God and it's all good. And therefore, I don't have to do anything.
Right.
Right.
Okay, Sheila, you specifically asked to talk about principle 2, the divine within every person. So I'm eager to hear about it.
The principle of the divinity of humankind reminds us that human beings are divine at their core and therefore inherently good. There is but one presence or source known by many names from which we all come. And the nature or the essential character of this source or presence is absolute good. Now, this source alone is supreme. That's important. So humankind, as Genesis 1:26-27 says, is made in the image and likeness of the Supreme One, and therefore humankind inherits the same character and essential nature as the Supreme One from whom it originates. This means that what is true of the Supreme One, the Creator, is also true of the creation, humankind, equally. We are divine beings with a divine purpose, not a human purpose. And that purpose expresses in a multitude of ways that glorify not me, not you, not humankind, but glorifies the Creator. So in all things we can ask, is this the will of the Creator? Am I being used by the Creator in this instant to express that which belongs and is of the Creator, the ultimate Creator? So every attempt to glorify the human as supreme is a lie, and it will always be a lie. It is the divine within, not human factors such as ancestry, such as race, such as religion, gender, economic status, that reveal our oneness. No, no. The oneness never leaves any one of us outside of its embrace. Divinity is given for each of us. It is a given. We come into this earth plane, one with the Creator, for all attempts to separate, segregate, and subjugate one of us at the expense of the rest of us, or any of us, must ultimately fail. My studies of this principle of divinity through this message of New Thought, because I hadn't heard of divinity of humankind or even thought of myself as divine until I was introduced to the message of New Thought in 1982 by the Reverend Dr. Mary Tumpkin. And this principle, as it was explained to me and then practiced by me, enabled me to deny the power of past experiences and even future experiences that I would have, because these experiences sought to deny my innate divinity. You see, this principle of divinity reminds me that as my great-great-grandmother Laney was herded onto an auction block to be sold, knocked to the ground in the hopes that she would release her child so that there would be 2 sales instead of 1, but she held on. And what divinity taught me is that her divinity empowered her to somehow hold on, to exhibit the strength of God. And because she held on, I'm here today. This divinity reminds me that the denial, I'm talking about me. I'm not talking about something someone told me, but this divinity principle reminds me that the denial of new school books, the denial of access to pools and beaches and libraries, and the denial of a railroad crossing in our community, the denial of housing, the denial of even to use a bathroom or drink from a water fountain, all of that was an attempt to rob me of my dignity and to ultimately deny my divinity. You see, when we don't get divinity right, when we don't get divinity right, we get things twisted and we operate from separateness rather than from oneness. We get things twisted when we don't operate from divinity. A noted theologian wrote that people of color are seen as subhuman. A retired police officer in Philadelphia reported that it was common for his partner to drive through neighborhoods unlike his own and say repeatedly, "The roaches are out tonight." If we see one another as divine, there is no way that we can see each other as subhuman, as a roach, or even less. There is no way that genocide of selected persons, Holocaust, enslavement, and the denial of human and constitutional rights could occur if we saw the divinity within each other and acted from it. If we see one another as divine, there's no way 21-year-old Matthew Shepard could be brutally pistol whipped and robbed and killed simply because of his sexual orientation. No, this doesn't happen in a world where we recognize divinity. You see, if we saw one another as divine, a noted celebrity would not have had to marry a woman of color within 48 hours or have a contract on his life carried out because he had a romantic interest in a Caucasian female. Until we acknowledge the divinity within ourselves and others too, and identify with the divine in our everyday lives, every aspect of it, running from none of it, being uncomfortable in it. Unless we recognize the divinity, we won't demonstrate the unity that is the grand intention. We won't be models of love, and we certainly won't demonstrate the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King spoke about. So tonight, I would just say to each of you, and as I say to myself, as I have been on a 14-day sabbatical, just listening and thinking of the divinity, not only of myself, but of everyone everywhere, that we have a choice. We can live from our divinity, or we can call forth experiences of Holocaust, of enslavement, of gender bias, of bias in sexual orientation, of keeping certain people in poverty, of certain preferences and special privileges for certain groups, and discrimination of all forms and injustice of every kind. It's our choice. And that's the power of this message. Let us use and sync ourselves with this principle of divinity. Let it remind us tonight that divinity isn't lived in isolation. Let me say that again. Divinity is not lived in isolation. It is an active recognition of God's presence in the midst of me and you and you and you and you and you and everyone everywhere. We refuse to allow the lie of human supremacy to cloak our divinity, rendering us as separate from one another rather than one with each other.
Okay, we promised a lively discussion, right? Thanks, Sheila. I think the same question comes up, though. Is it possible to look at someone and acknowledge they are divine, they are God in expression, and I think what they're doing is wrong and I want to stop them? Can you have both?
Absolutely, I have. I was a law enforcement officer, and we were on a raid. And my job was to secure a particular area of the place that we were raiding. And when I was securing the area, I asked everyone to, get on the floor. And I always walked in with a sense of, these are my brothers and my sisters. And I walked in and I said, I need you to get on the floor. We're looking for somebody. It's not any of you. I just need you to get on the floor. And there was this Caucasian man who challenged me. And I looked at him and I said to him, I am not going to break my fingernails. I said, but you see that guy over there? And I pointed to one who was a little rough and ready, who was always ready for a fight. I said, you see him? I said, now, if I call that guy over here, you're going to be pretty bloody and you may have some broken bones. But if you just get on the floor, as I asked you to, we'll get you out of here in a minute. And he got on the floor. So I'm a person, I call it out. You know, I'm not going to let it slip by. And it is being able to do my job, but at the same time, recognizing the dignity of every individual, because he had a right to resist, but with that came consequences. Make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, and I was approached. I remember being approached. I was actually at a New Thought event, and I was a speaker. And I remember a Caucasian man coming up to me. This is outside of the speaker's room in one of the hallways. And he started to talk to me in a demeaning way about my hair. Now, that wasn't gonna go over very well. So I thought to myself, would he do this to Ellen, Reverend Ellen, if she's walking down the hall? No. What made him think? See, that's what I asked. What made you think you could say that to me? What made you think you could say that to me? Am I a roach so you can say it? Am I subhuman so you can say it? Am I somebody who doesn't count so therefore you can say it? How many women have you? And so if we don't say anything, it continues. And all of us have had someone say something to us and we just hadn't thought of it in the way that it was received. It wasn't our intention, and we learned. So we can learn if we're willing to. But if we are all filled up, not even the Holy Spirit can put anything inside of you and reveal anything to you, because you know it all already. And so what I would say in terms of this principle of divinity is not so much that we are using the principle, but we are allowing the principles, every single one of them, to use us. We are surrendering. We are in surrendered mode. And the Spirit is using our hands and our feet and is using us in a way to glorify itself and not to glorify our humanness, because the humanness is just passing through. And that's why any form of supremacy related to the human is a lie, will always be a lie. Now we can prop it up. We can prop it up and make it appear to be the real thing. And we can go on an ego trip about it, but all of this shall pass. You know why? Because there's no principle supporting it.
It's not true.
There's
Michael,
no
go ahead. You look like you're bursting to say something.
Well, it's just that this is it, that this is the edge of our growth as in this relative reality. Just like a child has to go through stages of learning what is the right way to be a human being in society, as a species, we are growing and evolving and learning. And some of the things that have gone on for millennia, you know, that was part of what we did at a younger stage, but it doesn't work anymore. And we get to be at the growing edge of revealing spiritual principle into humanity, and anything that violates human divinity, as Sheila, just beautiful. Thank you so much. Then we get to let ourselves be uncomfortable with it too, but then step into it and say, no, that is not in alignment with truth.
Wendy?
I was just reflecting on the tough questions that, that we get asked around these principles. And I was reflecting on recognizing the divinity in ourselves and in one another. How sometimes we want to hold up the most extreme cases where the divinity seems to really be stuck on not being expressed through the individual as a way to say, well, therefore, these principles or this principle falls apart. How do you hold the divinity in XYZ, someone who's done the most egregious, cruel, awful act? And I will often try to bring it back first to a more practical level and say, what about starting right where we are with the people in our lives right now that we know that we are unforgiving toward, that we are holding bias toward, that we are prejudiced toward? Can we start there and grow into the experience of recognizing the presence and the power of God in each and every individual? I use the phrase sandpaper to the soul for people that I know I have a difficult time remembering and acknowledging the divine in them. Oh, Wendy, this person is sandpaper to my soul. Let me take the log out of my own eye so I can see the other much more clearly. So I think there's value sometimes in bringing the practice of these principles even closer to home in very real, immediate situations.
But isn't that why we're there?
Say that again, Sheila?
Isn't that why we are there? Wherever
Yes.
That's why we're there.
Yes.
All the places you could be in all the world. Why do you think you are where you are, hearing what you're hearing, right? And witnessing what you're witnessing? Why? Why are we still in the world? I used to ask myself that. Why am I still here? Johnny Coleman left, Reverend Mary left. You know, why am I still here? Because, Sheila, I still have use of you.
Amen.
And so if I say no, then I am denying that divine presence that is expressing in, through, and as me. I am denying that while my mouth is saying God is all there is and there is nothing else. So what happens is my whole life becomes a contradiction. And so we wonder why, you know, oh, I'm so good and look at all of this stuff that's happening to me. Well, let's just reassess and look at, are you really available to what the Spirit is doing? Someone said it like this, and they said, I wake up every morning and I say, God, you're doing some great things in all the world, and I just want to be a part of them. But most people wake up and say, God, I want you to help me with this. This is what I'm going to do today. And I want you to be there, and I want you to help me, and I want you to prosper me, et cetera, et cetera. And see, there's a difference in those paradigms. So I'm in the paradigm of what is it that I am being led to do? Why did I wake up this morning? Guide me, lead me, show me, and do the work, which is what Jesus said, of myself, I can do nothing. So if we're puffed up and thinking that we are the authority, we are not the authority. The authority is the ultimate one, by whatever name you know that one. And to the degree that that presence uses you, then to that degree are you walking in will and in the will of the Creator and purpose.
Ellen, I know you want to move on to the next principle, but I just had an insight in this conversation that there's a beautiful Emerson quote, which I have known for years and years and years. My teacher, Dr. Peter Weldis, used to say it a lot. The fact that I am here shows me that the soul had need of an organ. Shall I not assume the post? And I've always thought of that as being, I've been gifted so that God needs me to live this life of freedom and fulfillment, which is true. But I haven't linked it to why am I here now?
Yeah.
In 2020, when this world is doing all it's doing, why am I here now? Because the soul, that's capital S soul, spirit, had need of an organ. That's why I'm here. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and sometimes I ask, why did I volunteer for this particular kind of ministry?
It's a strange time to be in the ministry business.
It is.
So those of you who are listening can hear how these principles all factor into how we discern what is ours to do as spiritual people, which we'll talk more about. I chose principle 3 to talk about. It's about the thoughts we hold. The longer I work with it, the more mysterious and confusing it is. And I don't think we humans have a good handle yet on how it works. Thoughts have creative power to determine events and attract experiences. Unity's co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, believed in the power of mind over body, which was a fairly new idea in the 1800s. They both healed lifelong ailments through their thought, through their prayers and meditation. They believe that the mind creates prosperity, love, events, outcomes. They talked about how hard it is to hold a vision against mass consciousness that's going the other way. But they call this the law of mind action. It has more recently been popularized as the law of attraction, and in my opinion, trivialized as just wish really hard for what you want and you can have anything. It's a lot deeper than that. For one thing, you may get what you don't want if that's what you're focused on. Thoughts have creative power is a neutral law. In Unity, we say thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. So we love this law when things go well. Oh, look, I've created a new job, a new house, a boyfriend. It's painful to believe we had any role in creating the things that we have labeled bad. And I've seen a lot of people back away from this law, including a lot of new thought ministers. What they'll say is, well, we create our experience, but not the events. They're saying things happen randomly. We can choose how to respond to them, but they are emphatic that we have no control over events and outcomes. Okay, but the teaching is that we do create the actual events. It's a tough teaching. Fillmore said, everything connected with your life is the result of your own thinking. Your thought is the creative and destructive force in the world in which you live. It was 1891. But the Buddha had said the same thing 2,500 years ago. All that we are is the result of what we've thought, what we think we become. So it's an old idea. It's also a part of our general society. You've heard the term self-fulfilling prophecy, that what you speak will come true. That's this principle. The placebo effect, that if you believe a pill will help you, it will. Doctors know that the attitude of their patient will affect outcomes. It's why prayer works too. It's the power of focused thought. Problem is, we don't know exactly how it works or how to use it. And yes, and I can hear you saying this out there, yes, 7 billion other people are also creating with their thoughts. I don't think our thoughts collide as much as they merge according to the attraction in consciousness. And no, I can't explain how it works beyond that. But isn't it interesting to consider whether what's happening in the world now is a joint creation of global consciousness? To me, that's a really empowering thought, because if we created it, we can create something else. We can do something about it. I don't believe everything is created individually. You know, I don't make it rain on any given day. Some would say it's only because I believe I can't, but I know people who think we create weather as a group. We create violence as a society. Did we create the pandemic as the human race? I'm not saying we all sat around and thought about a coronavirus, but we believe in illness. We have worried about a microorganism that might wipe us out. We've made movies about that. So the thoughts are out there, and it's hard to resist them unless you're really paying attention. Being a creator is a tremendous responsibility, and most people don't want that. It's so much easier to be a victim. Things just happen to me. I had nothing to do with this. Or to blame somebody, well, you did this to me. Or even to blame ourselves. How did I create this? How did you create this? So do not speculate on how other people might have created whatever is happening in their lives. But for myself, I think it's an interesting and useful question to consider when the time is right, how I created something or why something showed up in my life. For example, why did I choose the parents I did? How did that set me up for this life? It's more interesting than blaming them for the way I turned out. Sometimes the word create throws people off, so maybe you agreed to it, maybe you attracted it. If you don't want to ask how you created something, you can ask, what did this come to teach me? How did it contribute to my spiritual growth? And once you can see that, you might be able to consider that you did agree to it at some level. Haven't you met people who said cancer turned out to be their greatest teacher and friend? Not that they were sitting around thinking about cancer. I hope maybe our souls are making wise choices on our behalf. So asking, how did I create this, is not as helpful as what am I creating now? What thoughts am I holding? What feelings are giving them fuel? And this will be important when we talk about principle 5. Where does the action come from? Are we acting from anger and blame or from love and compassion? The consciousness we hold will greatly affect the outcome of our actions because thoughts have creative power, and what we hold in consciousness shows up in our lives. So I have a question for the rest of you about this. I've heard from several New Thought people that I respect something like this: the coronavirus has no power over me. Health is my natural state of being. I will hold thoughts of health, and therefore I don't need to wear a mask. The only answer I've come up with so far is, well, that's the law in our county to wear a mask right now. But there's got to be something better and more spiritual than that. So help me out here.
Well, to your specific comment or question about wearing a mask, to me, there's many different ways of looking at that beyond only looking at it from the level of thought. I wear a mask. I even wear a mask when I'm outside and there's nobody else around me. I have my mask on. I do it as less from the place of thought, and definitely not from the place of fear, but from the place of compassion for the other, because I do believe in the science. And I look at every time I put that mask on as a way of gently expressing a consciousness and a heart space that says, I care about the other as much or more than I care about my own comfort. So I think there's, Ellen, to me, with this principle, the emphasis on just the word thoughts is the one that is always more troublesome to me. I think it's really about consciousness. Consciousness is built through our thinking, through our feeling, and through many other experiences. But I think it's consciousness individually and collectively that is creative, more than just the thought.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes.
I think it's
Others?
a life condition. Yeah, I could say gravity has no power over me. I am, and if my consciousness were to that level, I could levitate. I mean, that we hear a lot about in spiritual masters who learn to master that. I'm not there, and I just, is that really what I want to focus all of my spiritual creative energy on, is protecting myself from a virus? You can do that, but I just feel like there are some things that it's just, this is part of the game into which we have currently incarnated. And I love what Wendy said too, that it's like we're teaching how much we respect ourselves and others by these actions. But
yeah. Consciousness from which we take action.
Mm-hmm.
Sheila, I think you're muted.
There's a scripture and it says, agree with your adversary quickly. And one of the reasons for that is that you don't want to take the energy that's being leveled at you and use it against yourself. So everyone, I think, has to answer the question for themselves, because are you wearing a mask as a form of resistance, which is energy, or are you wearing a mask because you've been asked, maybe in your community, here where I am, there's certain regulations, and they ask you to follow the regulations, and so without hesitation, I'm going to follow the regulations. And so, I think what is really key is that every individual has to ask themselves, what are they doing? Are they putting up a fight? Because the same energy that they use to fight could be the same energy that they could use to help move us forward in the whole arena. And so, I think it's a personal thing. At the same time, I think it's ministers that our people look to us for leadership. And so what I find many times is that it's not so much what I want, because Sheila McKeithen, I'm in a particular place, but because I am the spiritual leader, I know that people are coming by our church office, because I still go into our office, to see, is Reverend Sheila wearing her mask? Is she doing this or is she doing that? And so I certainly want to do what I am called to do. And if I'm called to wear the mask, to follow the regulation without a fight, without a fuss, then I certainly do that. Because some things I find aren't worth the energy. You know, they're zapping your energy, and you know, you don't need that right now. Right now, people are pulling on all of us. You're home trying to rest. Some of your congregants are pulling on you. They're afraid. They are going through something. They're pulling on your consciousness, etc. And so the more available you are and the less restricted you are, not being tied down by anything, not even your own thoughts, is freeing. You know, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, there is freedom. And so the question is that, are you free? And does a mask limit you? Does it really limit you? Is that where your freedom is, in a mask? I choose to think not.
Okay.
It's not, the power isn't in the things. The power is in the divine within you. That's where the power is.
Mm-hmm. We keep coming back to that, don't we?
Yeah.
So Wendy, we have about 9 minutes, which is a short time to talk about Principle 4, but jump in and we'll see where we go.
All righty. And I can be pretty concise with this. So I've been invited to talk about our fourth principle, prayer and meditation, keeping us aligned with the one great power in the universe. And I just want to kind of throw out a couple of definitions here. With regard to prayer, we look at it in unity in I think, a unique way. The way we approach prayer is affirmative prayer. We do not approach prayer from the place of beseeching a distant God, trying to get God or spirit to do something for us. We approach prayer from the connection with spirit itself, praying from the awareness of God, praying from the awareness of oneness. I look at prayer very much as a way of talking to God, talking to spirit, and doing so in such a way that I'm able to lift my consciousness, my awareness above appearances. In Unity, we use the tools of affirmations and denials as a way to work at the level of our mind and our consciousness, to use affirmations and denials in our prayer time to train the mind, to change the circuitry, the neurology of the mind, to establish ourselves in the habit of good thought, good, healthy thinking. Affirmations are a way that we can remind ourselves of the one presence and power, no matter what is showing up on the level of appearances, that beneath it is the presence and the power and the energy of the divine, of spirit. And affirmations speak to the truth of that, no matter what the appearance is. We use the tool of denial as a way not to ignore or not to discount what may be happening at the physical level or the relative level, but to pull our energy away from the appearance of limitation and to stand solid in the awareness of the one presence and power. And so Unity's approach to prayer is not beseeching a distant God, but praying from the awareness of truth. The practice of meditation, if we look at prayer as a way to talk to God, meditation is a way, I think, of listening. Meditation is a way of getting quiet and still, quieting the chatter of the busy mind, and opening our hearts to the experience of that one presence and that one power. And to be willing to listen for that still small voice and listen to that still small voice. So meditation is a way of listening, it's a way of opening up. And I think, well, why do we do these things? Why do we do affirmative prayer? Why do we practice meditation? It's not to change God, it's to change the one who prays. It's to change the one who meditates. And so it is so much less about what happens on the mat or happens in the prayer chair or the meditation chair. It's what happens because we have spent time in that practice, so that then when we get up off our meditation chair or our prayer chair, we are changed in consciousness. And what I know to be absolutely true is that any decision I make and any action I take in my life, if it is birthed out of the consciousness of affirmative prayer and meditation, that decision and that action will always be much better, much clearer, much more helpful than if it is just from my own human level of thinking.
And that's how we get to centeredness and inner peace, regardless of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we want to be before we go out and take action.
Yeah.
Right. So we're coming from that consciousness.
Right. Not from a consciousness of anger, not from a consciousness of fight, but from a consciousness that resides in the awareness that I'm not my brother's keeper. I am my brother. I am my sister. And I come from this space of the divine in me acknowledges that in you. And it is from that that I then move my feet, even if it's moving my feet in situations that are challenging and difficult, because the world is hurting right now. We're going through some pretty tough times.
Michael, Sheila, the role of prayer and meditation.
I think you said it beautifully, Wendy, that prayer and meditation change us, open us, align us. In the first principle I talked about are, error thoughts, false beliefs, whatever we want to call them, those places where we get out of alignment with truth. And there's also all the science too that shows what spending time in meditation does to our brain patterns too.
Right.
It's just left to, I'm just going to speak for Michael, left to my own devices. If nothing is tended up here, it goes crazy quick.
Yeah.
I need to prune my thinking.
And I think there's so many ways that we can pray. Unity's approach is a certain approach, right? And many ways to meditate. And it's less about trying to find the perfect way and really being consistent in my practice. I have a phrase I use with myself, because sometimes I've noticed that my prayer time or my meditation time doesn't seem as effective or as good as at other times. And the human part of me sometimes will say, well, then I won't practice, and I let it slide, much to my own challenge when I do that. But I use the phrase, well, it's the discipline of it that retrains my mind and retrains my heart. And so I call those meditation times that maybe don't feel so great or perfect as my placeholder meditation, that at least I'm consistent in the practice, because the practice will change me over time.
Yeah. And Wendy shared her practice in a calendar and a journal that were published last year, right? And it shows that discipline. It's called Just for Today, and it is an intention or an affirmation for every day. And I loved reading them because I got to edit the book. But it's it made me appreciate even more the discipline of it. And I've never liked that word, but it's the same root as disciple. Yeah. And so it is the way that we practice, whether we feel like it or not, as you said,
right.
Whether we think it's getting through or not.
Right.
So we are at the top of the hour, just about. When we planned this panel, we said, we can't have Michael Gott on this panel without hearing him sing. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm not calling it a break, because you're not going to want to leave your computer. Call it an interlude of 4 minutes and 19 seconds. And when we come back, we will talk about Principle 5 and what in the world we can or should or could be doing as spiritual people in uncertain times. So we'll be right back.
Just one life, it's all that we've been given here.
just one chance to make a difference where we live. And just one man. I'm only human, but only human means I've got so much to give. Love can move the world as the moon in the sky moves the sea. Love can cause the wars to cease. Love can move this world to peace. It's a tide that begins with you and me. Love can move the world as the warmth of the sun moves the tree. Feel the wind of love increase as we move this world to peace. Come love the world with me. Look around, there's someone hurting near you. Look around, there might be something you can do. Look within you and find your spirit to change the world. There's got to be a change in you. Love can move the world as the moon in the sky moves the sea. Love can cause the wars to cease. Love can move this world to peace. It's a time that begins with you and me. Love can move the world as the warmth of the sun moves the tree. Feel the wind of love increase as we move this world to peace. Come love the world with me. Oh, love can move the world as the moon in the sky moves the sea. Love can cause the wars to cease. Love can move our world to peace. It's a time that begins with you and me. Oh, love, love, only love can move the world as the warmth of the sun moves the tree. Feel the wind of love increase as we move our world to peace. Come love the world with me. Come love the world with me.
Tomorrow, listeners, we're going to send you an email with a resource page, a link to a resource page where you will have lots of links to other things, including where to hear more of Michael's music. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay, we're finally here for Principle 5. We've been referring to it all evening. It says, it's not enough to understand spiritual teaching. We must live the truth we know. Principle 5 is usually called the action step, but I think live the truth we know doesn't necessarily mean you march in the street or you run for office. It doesn't say leap into action. I think sometimes living the truth we know means butt out, back off, or hold the high watch, but we also want to put feet on our prayers when we can. And there are lots of ways to embody spiritual principles. So I want to do a couple of things in this next hour. One is to ask the panelists to tell you about the work they've been doing from spiritual principle. And the other is to take your questions in the chat. I already have a few and I'll be looking at them. What do the principles look like in real life action? It's different for every person. And in some of our pre-meetings, we talked about what Michael and Wendy and Sheila are doing. Michael said he has become willing to be controversial. And Wendy has been conducting anti-racism work for a long time. And Sheila said, none of this talk about race is new to her. Thank you very much. And that the conversation may be uncomfortable and just let that be okay. So I'm not even sure where to start. Michael, you want to tell what's going on at Unity of Houston?
Sure, thanks, Ellen. In 2016, with the confrontation between African-American community members and the police in Ferguson, Missouri, and the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement. Not that that was the beginning of the this conversation around police brutality and its impact upon our Black brothers and sisters, but there was something about that moment that something came alive in me and in our leadership, and we wanted to bring our spiritual principles to this ache, to this wound, to this need in our culture. And so what we did is I brought my friend Tracy Brown, who is very involved in the Centers for Spiritual Living. She's a practitioner in that movement, has been the leader of that organization, and has spent her life teaching diversity and race issues, and she's amazing. And she has this solid New Thought principle. So Cindy Wigglesworth, who is a member of our community, who is also a great thinker for our movement, the three of us created one evening's event, and we just said, we want to talk about this now. How do we want to go forward? And what it turned into was what we call our Healing the Heart of America initiative. And we really wanted to just give us a place to explore internally in our church how these principles that we live by, what our teaching says about the problems, the hurts, the heartaches, the sorrows of our culture, those places where we are not fully living divinity. We thought that we would have a lot of different areas, that we would look at race for sure, but also gender equality, all of those things. And it's really come to be about conversation of race, and mostly a conversation between white people and Black people. And we live in a very diverse city. Houston is a very diverse city, and our church, it's one of my favorite thing about my community, its greatest blessing, is that we are the rarity of rarities. We are a diverse church. And we, from the beginning, in our dialogues on race, we've had a lot of it's been educational. People are wanting to learn. We need to be taught, because the things that we weren't taught this, and that's right. Everything is grounded in spiritual principle, and everything is a safe space for us to have real conversations. No one is made wrong. And we've also created a series of ongoing compassionate conversations in small groups for people. And I had a couple of Black women in my church who've been a member of our church for over 30 years, who said that they've said things now in front of white people that they never thought that they would say. And it was met with love, lots of discomfort for everyone in the process. And we don't have an agenda. We don't know if this initiative is going to keep going forever. We don't know. Some of us have been showing up at demonstrations and peaceful protests. There's no impulsion for the group to do that. It's really very personal, and it's about our community. That's where we are right now. It may turn into something else, but it has been incredibly powerful. Now that I've become senior minister, Reverend Karen Tudor is one of the co-chairs of this initiative. And then we also had the great honor of bringing in Dr. Jean Ladding, semi-retired social work professor from University of Houston. And that's the same department that birthed Brene Brown into the world. And the three of them, Karen and Cindy and Jean, are just doing such a beautiful job of listening, just listening within our church, within the world, what wants to be talked about now. And when things arise, George Floyd set off a cascade of pain in our church. He was a man from Houston. We responded. We brought a ceremony so we could share our grief around it. We brought opportunities for us to talk about it. So anyway, I could go on all night, but it's we're still discovering it, but I'm really grateful for the work that's being done in our church.
Thank you. Wendy, yours is about race too. I mean, churches do so many things,
Right.
but you've been having discussions for a long time.
For quite a long time. And ours evolved very, very organically. I've been involved through my work with the Association for Global New Thought for many, many, many years in the deeper question of how do we, as individuals in New Thought practicing these principles, how do we apply them? What's the intersection between our spiritual principles and the hurts in the world? So that's been a backdrop for me for a very long time. But after the riots in Charlottesville in 2017, that was a personal breaking point for me. And I found myself deeply, deeply troubled and wondering what is mine to do, and is there some way that as the leader of the Unity Center, I might be able to leverage the heart, the teaching, the resources of our community to somehow make a difference in the area of racism. How could we stand for racial equity? And I stood before my congregation and invited or wrote to the Black members of my congregation, and some of whom I knew very well, some of whom I did not know very well. And I invited them to come and spend some time with me in my home. And I said, I need to understand, because I realize there's an awful lot that as a white woman, I didn't know, I don't know, and my heart is hurting. And I believe that I need to be about doing something. And I met with the group of Black members in my community, in my home, one Sunday a month for 6 months, and sat together for 3 and 4 hours at a time and just said, will you talk to me? Will you help me understand your lived experience? That became a catalyst for so much that has unfolded as a result of those conversations, much like Michael said a moment ago. The breaking open of the heart, the looking at what's going on, the feeling of what can we do, and the genuine willingness to listen. My Black members said to me, every single one of them in that circle, and I said, what do we do next? They said, you need to call on your white members. And just as you created a safe place for us to tell you about our lived experiences, you need to do the same with your white people. And you need to help them to feel safe to say stuff out loud. And you need to help them become more educated. And so I was afraid. I thought, I want to bring us together. You're telling me I need to bring us apart. And they were absolutely right, Ellen, in their wisdom. And so I did. And we had such great response that I needed to meet with 2 different groups of people, each for a 6-month period, just my white, what we called aspiring white allies. And man, did we do deep introspective work, all based in our spiritual practice and teaching, but also educating ourselves. And it became clear that there were 3 pillars we needed to focus on. As white people, we needed to become more racially aware. Most of us admitted to being raised that as a white person, and especially a spiritual person, a Christian or a religious person, that we should be colorblind. No, we needed to learn to be color brave. We needed to increase our racial awareness. We needed, the second pillar was to increase our racial literacy. We read books. We had tough, uncomfortable conversations, but we could, because we could do it within the safety of our spiritual teaching and just as white people struggling to find a deeper understanding and dealing with feelings of guilt or shame that came up as we began to realize our education was rather incomplete. There was so much we didn't know, because as part of the dominant culture, we didn't need to know. Racism didn't affect us as a white person. And then our third pillar was action. And so we explored, what are we going to do about this? And what's evolved from the willingness to be in prayer and meditation and to move where spirit has been moving me and my community is resulted now in having just completed a similar program with virtual white allies, similar to what I had done in my ministry. Just completed it this past Wednesday, taking 120 white people through our program. 21 states were represented. We had unity ministers and CSL ministers and individuals of different communities and organizations. And what is evolving now is a lot of action coming out of raising racial awareness, raising racial literacy, and being active. And I'll finish by saying we are now in the process of creating a nonprofit that is going to be devoted to dismantling the structures of racism and building a genuinely equitable society. Our mission will be to create measurable progress in racial literacy and help close the racial wealth gap. Our focus areas are going to be differentiation by developing a scalable social entrepreneurship model that will self-fund. The institute, the nonprofit, will be building on collaboration, education, and influence. We've already been promised $100,000 seed money and have launched a matching campaign. The same donor is contributing another $100,000. All of this coming from within our teachings and within deep listening and sacred space.
Hey, Sheila, how are you practicing principle in action?
Yes, my mic is on.
It is.
Well, there are several ways. The first thing that I want to say is, as a person of color, these issues aren't like out there. They are what I live every single day. Mm-hmm. And so, whatever you see flash on the news, whether it's terrorizing someone, killing someone, marginalizing a group or whatever. These are all people that we know, or we know someone like them, or these are our brothers and our sisters, people that we know, people that, call us every single day and say, listen, this is happening, how can you help, et cetera, et cetera. So I find that as these discussions are happening, I'm really looking at life, every single day that people are living. I think about the ministers who are listening in, or the ministers in our various, even New Thought movements or ministries all over the world, and the effect that all that is unfolding has on, not only those who now have freshly opened eyes, but those who have been living with this all of their lives, all of our lives. This has been happening. So you need to be very clear that this is not new. This is not a new phenomenon, that we have been living with this and through this all of our lives. At the present moment, I have the opportunity to live in a country, outside of the US. And it's predominantly a country, the head of state here is a person of color. So are the cabinet members and all of that stuff. So when I answer your question, Ellen, I'm going to answer it from the perspective of locally, one of the things that we do is we've added a noonday time where people can actually come in and talk, and someone leads a meditation, and we can actually address, you know, any concerns that people may have. Another thing that we're doing, that I do always, is the current events. I don't shy away from them. I incorporate them in whatever I'm doing because they are relevant to the people and to the audience that I speak to, and the people who tune in to what's happening, not only in our ministry, but in Universal Foundation for Better Living Ministries, because we are predominantly American, a predominantly African-American organization, and Caribbean nationals, et cetera, then, you know, if we don't speak to issues, then we're ignoring our people. So that's very important to understand. The ministries have been doing phenomenal work. We have been meeting with our ministers, those that lead groups, whether it's a ministry, a study group, a discussion group. We meet with them weekly. I think we're in our like 17th or 18th week, just meeting every week to talk about current events, what's happening, or self-care. That's really important because ministers have had to shoulder so much during this time. And I am concerned whether or not our ministers are being taken care of, even as they take care of their flock. And so that has been very, very important for me. Another thing that has happened is in the Universal Foundation for Better Living, our seminary, the Johnny Coleman Theological Seminary, just hosted a class with Dr. Darnice Martin, and Miss Tarnisha Rowan, called Blacks in New Thought, to hear the perspective of people of color, the contribution to New Thought, and where they are right now, what is of concern to them. And so that was a fabulous course and really an eye opener. So I have to thank Dr. Anna Price, our provost, for that. And then Galen McDowell, Reverend Galen McDowell, hosts a Truth Transform radio program on Unity Radio. And he has had me on several times and other guests talking about how our spirituality rolls out in these times. What's the relevance of it? How do you practice it on a day-to-day basis? And also, how do you take care of yourself in the midst of this process? So I really thank Reverend Galen for that. Reverend Charles Taylor in Miami has hosted a fabulous seminar called the History of Voting Rights. Because so many people are disillusioned these days, one of our teachers and ministers, Reverend Yannick Douillon, put together a series tracing the history of voting in the United States so that people could get a perspective that voting isn't a one-time event, and how it has emerged on the landscape of America. Excellent job. Just so it's a lot of education. You know, we're a teaching ministry, so we do a lot of that. Some of our ministries, as Reverend Gott said, have also, I know Reverend Derek Wells in Chicago, Reverend Charles Taylor in Miami for sure, have actually participated in protests in their city, Miami, Chicago. They have actually been out on the front line, actually walking with people in those particular protests. So we give thanks for that. And then most of all, how do we care for our flock during this time? Everybody is in a different place. How do you meet people where they are, keep them engaged? One of the things that's really important to me is to continue to incorporate current events whenever I'm given an opportunity to speak. And then what I have been doing is going live for 10 minutes every single day from Monday through Saturday. And people just show up. I've been on sabbatical for the past 2 weeks, of course. And so this week I started to just post things that they could do during the 10-minute time. But this is my debut back on the media. And so I will pick that up and continue to do that, just to see where people are around the world and how we can be more supportive. I think one of the greatest things we can do right now is listen.
Mhm.
Listen. And number two, be willing to be uncomfortable with what you hear.
Mhm.
It's okay. And that's what I would say, Reverend Ellen.
Thank you. Just as an aside, we got a question in the chat we probably should have addressed up front, which is Reverend Sheila's UFBL, the rest of us are Unity. Michael is also ordained in the Centers for Spiritual Living. And so they're asking, why do we have these different branches of truth with a capital T? There are several of them, 6 or 7. And you all can help me answer this, but I think it's just because they emphasize different things. They developed at different times. And, they satisfy different people, just like there are different denominations within Christianity. There are different branches of New Thought. Do y'all think that's a good
Right.
enough answer?
Most people don't know that there are more than 1,000 denominations within Christianity.
Mhm.
Most people don't know that.
Okay, so let's go back to race, because that's what we're getting questions mostly about.
Ellen, while you're fielding that question, can I just drop a thought in? Because
Please.
each of us has spoken a little bit to recognizing the uncomfortableness of some of these conversations for ourselves and as ministers leading them or facilitating them in our communities. And one of the things that I say again and again that I think is so important to remember is that if we in this teaching can't hold ourselves graciously but solidly in truth in these uncomfortable conversations the conversations lead to culture changing. If we can't hold these, then who in the heck do we think in the world is going to be equipped to stay in the discomfort and move beyond it into healing? Our teachings prepare us to do it.
Mhm.
I think our teachings demand us to do it, quite honestly.
Yeah, but we want to think positive and happy and, God is good. And
It's not binary.
I think it is fairly new for Unity. It has been mostly an interior path.
Yeah, it has.
In the last 20 years, I've seen more interest in looking up and looking out at the world and saying, what can I do?
Absolutely. I've been in Unity minister for 40 years, so I have definitely seen that shift. And you're right on. It's just about 20 years that we've been making this shift. I think we're as a movement, we are maturing and
Right.
evolving.
I've been in the movement for 27 years. Most of that was in CSL as a musician, then a practitioner, and then a minister, and then I've been in Unity. Although I've been singing and speaking in Unity churches for that whole time, I've been working in the union ministry for about 10 years and been ordained in Unity for the last 6. I will tell you that I was music director for a convention for CSL probably about 20 years ago. And a resolution to support same-sex marriage was brought forward to the floor, and it was defeated.
Wow.
It was shocking, and
Wow.
so that happened. That there were a lot of smaller churches in smaller towns that would not feel comfortable going back to their community, so the ministers voted it down. And I also would say that 20 years ago, there was still enough of that generation that just said that this is not ours to do. Yeah. That we are not to take a stance on these political issues. And what came out of that was a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort. Dr. Jean Ladding, I mentioned before, who is really helping us so much. She is African American. She too has been doing this work her whole life, and also grew up in New Thought too. She was actually grew up in both religious science and theosophy, which is interesting. But she told me a year before we even started this program at Unity of Houston, she said, Michael, if we are to grow, we must learn to bear discomfort. And I think it's universally true. And that convention for CSL, and it was actually before CSL was CSL, it was the United Church of Religious Science. That was the birth of the Social Action Committee for that movement. And that was the birth of an awareness that dawned in the organization that said that we do have a place to stand, particularly for human rights issues, based upon our spiritual principles. This is ours to do. So sometimes it is those painful, most uncomfortable moments that are the birth, the doorway, the portal for our evolution.
These are human rights issues.
Yeah, I have to agree. Going back to the question that Reverend Ellen mentioned was in the chat, Universal Foundation for Better Living, established in 1974 by the Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman, was birthed out of also racial indifference. And so she just had to build her own. She had to start her own. And she said, and this platform that I am building will be an equitable one. And it will be one where we are all God's children. We will not teach the divinity of some and not others. And we won't act like that. And so she had a history of within the movement, New Thought, being able to not live on campus, being told, you're going to have to leave, and Kansas City is a sundown town, and so you're going to have to get out of town before sundown. As a single Black woman in the 50s, trying to study to heal her body temple, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so every organization, each one of us has a history. And so for the person who asked the question, I would encourage you to do some research and look at how each movement was birthed and what it was birthed out of, what's its intention, what was the climate at the time. And because sometimes, particularly even if you look at women as well, women like even Mary Baker Eddy was forced to build her own, because she would show up and everything would be so powerful, and the next night she'd get there to continue and the door would be locked. Right? She couldn't get in. Yeah. And so so you've got your gender equity issues, you've got your racial issues, once again, when the practice is supposed to be the divinity within each one of us, that's supposed to be our prime principle. And so I'll never forget, I think it was in the 90s when Mr. Tom Zender, who was at Unity Village at the time, invited the Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman to Unity Village. And of course, Johnny, she came with all of us. I had about 8 people from Jamaica, and I don't know, people came from everywhere. And we filled that auditorium. And Mr. Zender stood on stage on behalf of Unity. I think he was one of the executives in charge at that time, and made a public apology to the Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman for the way that she was treated when she was a part of the Unity movement. And so, everything comes full circle. And so here we are today, 46 years later, still teaching the same principles that Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman learned through Unity. So again, that is a demonstration, once again, of taking what is an adversity and moving it forward, practicing the principles in love, and just watching to see what is God's plan in this, and then how do I play my part? And that's what we're talking about, and she certainly played her part.
Thank you so much for telling the rest of that story. For those of you who don't know this background, Johnny Coleman was a Black woman who came to Unity to become a minister. This was the early 50s, and Unity was willing to ordain Black women, which a lot of seminaries would not have, but they didn't let her live on campus. And Unity is still hurting over that. Wishes it hadn't happened, has apologized publicly. Johnny protested along with some of her white classmates, and Unity changed its policy. And she went on to fabulous success, which is the rest of the story. Created an enormous church in Chicago, created the Universal Foundation for Better Living. We've had quite a bit of conversation in the chat about Johnny Coleman and her experience at Unity. So this is what our CEO, Jim Blake, said. He said, "We can't speak to the Fillmore thinking at the time. In hindsight, we can see clearly, as this question points out, that the teachings were not congruent with the decisions made on campus at the time, the teaching that we're all divine. What's important now is to recognize the evolution in this consciousness within our movement, to call this out, heal it, and stand for a greater expression of equality. We're joining the rest of the world in exposing these injustices and standing for greater inclusion, diversity, and equity." So, working on it.
Well, Ellen, just as our country is, I mean,
Right.
our founding fathers, the principles on which our country was founded have not been lived out yet. They were aspirational, and it's ours to step into them and make them real for everyone. Just like I think our spiritual principles, we've looked at them through aspirational eyes, and now we need to embody them fully, regardless of the color or gender of our skin.
Question, what would be good references to help white people understand the Black experience in the US? There are many, and some of them will be on the resource page that we've created for you. You'll get that link tomorrow. Can you all name a couple of really good ones for white people to learn about the Black experience in the US?
Well, Ibram Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning, is excellent. It's voluminous. His more recent book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is excellent as well. I think what can be a couple of things I think are very important, and that is that I remember my Black members saying to me, "It is not our responsibility to educate you. You need to educate yourself." And I think that's even more so right now, because our Black and Brown brothers and sisters have been burdened with this their entire lives, and they're tired, they're hurting, and all of that and more. However, if you do have a Black friend, a friend of color, or a colleague that seems at all willing to sit with you, listen. Just be well. Reverend Sheila said this a few moments ago. We've each said it. The importance of listening and believing someone else's lived experience. So it's the education, but it's the listening.
There's a book that I think it's from the 90s that I really love. Is Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Tatum. And she also, she suggests what your community did is that it's important for white people to sit together by themselves and talk about this too. And that feels taboo somehow, but that's important too. And I also, we did a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and a friend of mine in our community, long-term Unity member, who's African American, gave a beautiful talk and brought some questions about how we make assignments. And she had just done some training, and she did say exactly this: it is not Black people, it's not theirs to heal racism. that's there. You can't ask the people who bear the consequences of this sin in our consciousness to be the ones responsible for healing it. It's just, but she said, what we can do is we can companion you. And the generosity of the African American people in my community to do that companioning work is profound.
Yeah.
And they've been telling me, I listen, I often will it's one of the Black grandmothers who will say, I need to talk to you. And I will listen. And I've been told that I need to shop at Black-owned businesses and eat at Black-owned restaurants and listen to Black music and poetry and read fiction and watch movies by Black directors and writers, not so that I don't want to appropriate Black culture, but I want to be educated for that experience, and I want to honor it. I want to honor what is, they are a part of my nation, part of my church, part of my people, and I want to honor that.
Yes, what I'm gonna do is, it's kind of hard because I don't have to read about it. 'Cause I love it. But, in answer to Reverend Ellen's question from the chat, I would recommend, well, there are many books out. I mean, really, just a ton, just do your research. But in particular, if you want to know like what Dr. Martin Luther King went through, a good book is to read Strength to Love. The Strength to Love. The Strength to Love by Dr. Martin Luther King is an excellent read. Anything by James Baldwin. If you even Google, there are different clips where James Baldwin is speaking, and he is just so eloquent. There's one clip where he's speaking to, I think, some students at Oxford. And he talks about living in a country where you're basically invisible. And you would be able to get into that and to listen. There are movies. Look at 42, the story of Jackie Robinson. Look at Black Panther. Look at the Marshall movie. Look at Ray Charles, the Ray Charles movie. And as he's going into the Georgia theater, he's being urged, Mr. Charles, you have the opportunity to change Georgia. You can refuse to play if Black people can't sit in the theater like everybody else. You can change this today. And Ray Charles does. He turns around and says that unless Black people are allowed in, because see, what happened was the musicians, and my aunt told me this, the musicians would come to, and I'm going to go to Florida now because that's where I'm from. The musicians would come on Miami Beach, and they would all play the stage. Of course, the men, you couldn't look at a white woman. So a lot of people wonder why some people look down, and that's because to look up could get you killed or lynched. And so a lot of people, their gaze is down. And they would perform, but they couldn't live in the hotel they performed in. Did you get that? So you just imagine you're going to speak at a church. You can speak there, but you can't now socialize with the people. You have to kind of go out through the back door and be herded somewhere because you're really a nobody. And so this continues. This continues to happen, and so those movies would help you as well. I'm like a visual person. Visual is pretty high on my learning, the way that I learn, and so movies mean a lot to me. So those movies would help you as well.
Okay, thanks. So lots to watch and read. Here's a question from Jennifer. Does the panel think what's occurring in our nation has come as a wake-up call for those who can embody a higher power, no matter what color or religion we are?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I think everything is a call to consciousness. And what's the thing Michael Beckler says, that pain pushes till vision pulls?
Mm-hmm.
And pain is always an opening for healing if we're willing to be used by love. I think it's the way you phrased it, Sheila, is that if we're open to the flow of divine creativity, divine evolution, divine transformation. So yes, all of this pain that we're seeing is an invitation, a calling to anyone who's listening, to be a part of the birth of something new.
I firmly believe in these 14 days that I have just kind of pulled back for a minute to just listen. I firmly believe that the call is also for us to be strong, because what is coming through, what is emerging, what is being birthed is going to require strength to bring it forward. And so don't get stuck in your pain, because I have need of you, like, the disciples had to go and say, the Lord have need of this donkey. So
Yeah.
the Lord has need of you. The Lord has need of you. Don't just sit in a corner and say, woe is me. The Lord has need of you in this hour, to be as strong as you can be, to know that God is everywhere present, to know that you are divine, to know that you can then coordinate what you think and how you feel in sync with the fact that the Lord my God is with me, the fact that I am more than enough, that I am a man, that I am a child of God, and to spend some time in your contemplative mode, as Reverend Wendy said, to know, to have that affirmed in your being, that you may rise up and embody it. Not because I'm embodying it, but because it is now written in your heart by the Holy Spirit. It is written in there, and now it must be done. And so we need individuals who, with an open consciousness, and they're willing now to have whatever those belief systems are in us that would prevent us to rising as the strong ones, to prevent us to cloak ourselves in limitation of human supremacy, when we know this too shall pass. If we rise to the occasion and our yes is firm, our yes is consistent, then we are used in a way you won't even know. I'm going into a lesson series called Destiny. And one of the things that Bishop T.D. Jakes says in his book, Destiny, Steps to Your Purpose, is that you don't know where destiny is leading you. Mm-hmm. And that's the sense of being uncomfortable. I don't know where this is going to go. Reverend Wendy, I don't know where this dialogue is going to go. We're just going to start. Now we're going to have this institute. What is all of that going to look like? Well, I don't know all the details, but we're just going to start. Tom Zender, well, we're just going to start to apologize. We're going to just start, and let's just see where we go from here. We're going to do it. And so right now, I think what we're all called to do is answer the question, can I use you? Mm-hmm. This is the divine speaking now, it's not me. Mm-hmm. Are you available? And if you are available, if some of your habits and thoughts and attitudes and past actions and experiences will prevent you from being used, are you willing to dump them? Mm-hmm. Are you willing to let, as Ricky Byers' song says, let the love wash over you? Mm-hmm. And see, these are the questions in this hour. But I firmly believe that I needed to be in a place of strength and just meet in strength with the Creator continually, just continue to have that affirmed in me. I am strong in the Lord and in the power of the Lord's might. And to just continue to have that affirmed in me and see how it shows up every single day.
We have, Eric said, these are just my thoughts, but the teachings often don't go deep enough into our humanity. Holding uncomfortableness and pain and rage and sorrow are part of that. Building a bridge between our principles and being human and living that are part of what we in this conversation are creating. So I read that as appreciation for the conversation. I'm going to pause here for just a second. We still have time for some more questions, but you may be seeing on your screen an opportunity to donate. And that is to continue exactly this kind of thing, so that Unity can present speakers and music and uplifting gatherings. We have a beautiful campus and we love to do in-person events, but not right now. And as we've moved more and more things online, we have realized that more and more people can participate. all over the country and the world. So that's what you're supporting with your donation. Even if you're watching this recording much later, you can still donate, and we are grateful. Okay, now I've got a tough question. This one is from Blanche. She says, Black Lives Matter is a system of thought. Began when the first slaves were brought out of Africa and put on the auction block. Black Lives mattered as a real issue for Harriet Tubman and others seeking freedom. Have things really changed? Sheila, you want to start with that?
My gosh, have things really changed? I think there's been some change. I think that there's also been some regression. I have to say there's change, because tonight my life is better than my great-great-grandmother, Laney, who stood on an auction block. My life is better than the daughter that she held, my great-grandmother, Josephine. My life is better than my grandmother, Jetty, who never learned to read and write. My life is better. So I have to say that there's been some improvement, and I think it's important to recognize the progress. I think that's really, really, really important. Not that we have arrived, certainly not. Not when you hear every single day how, an individual, usually a Black male or, some other woman's child, some other man's son, has been, shot, terrorized, killed, because they drove a car, they were sleeping in their bed, they were, had their hands up, they were walking away from the officer, whatever that, whatever the story is. So I think it's important to recognize the progress that has been made, and to understand that what is important now, what I see, is to listen, especially when you don't understand and you have no experience in the matter. Just listen and then ask informed, absolutely, because my life is better, and I can call the names of my ancestors, and my life today is better than theirs was. Is it the best? Have I arrived? Absolutely not. But I do have opportunities that they paved the way for me to have these opportunities. And so I am now paving the way for those coming along to have better opportunities. And that's why we're here, because none of us are going to be here indefinitely. So we are, and the question, I think, having been at death's door, that I asked myself was, did my passing this way make a difference? That's what's going to matter. Who you loved and who loved you. How big your car is isn't going to matter. I never asked that. I never asked how much money is in the bank. I never asked, is my house big enough? When I was at death's door, what was important was, Lord, did I do what you asked me to do? And did I accomplish what I came here to do? So let me tell you this, and this will probably, I guess I'll just shut up after this, but remember, you have an assignment. You are here because you have an assignment, and your job is not the one you go to every day. The job is to find out what is your God-given assignment, why you were born to the parents you were born to, and the place you were born to, why you had the education you had, or the education you didn't have, why you married who you married or you didn't marry, or why they said no to you and didn't marry you, all of that, because you have an assignment. And your soul is never going to be satisfied until you fulfill that assignment. And hating on other people is not the assignment.
Amen.
Because remember, if we're all divine, then hate has to be a lie, because it falls under the umbrella of human supremacy. Only humans hate on each other, not divine beings.
Amen.
Okay. Questions on lots of different topics about women, about Native Americans, Here's one for the whole panel. If Charles Fillmore and Eric Butterworth were here right now, what do you believe they would say on today's social climate? If you're new to Unity, Charles Fillmore was a co-founder of Unity. Eric Butterworth was one of our great ministers and writers in the 1970s and 80s, mainly, is when he was writing. What would they say?
I can respect the curiosity of such a question. And of course, we wouldn't be here were it not for Charles Fillmore, at least not in this Unity teaching, Charles and Myrtle. And Eric Butterworth is perhaps my favorite Unity author and was my favorite Unity minister. But I think to ask what they would do discounts the culture and the times in which they lived, which informed them and worked on them. So I think much more important is what are we going to be doing? And Reverend Sheila, I love, it's not the job you go to. What is your God assignment? So not to be unkind to the person who asked the question, but I think there's a more important question that we have to ask. And that is, what is ours to do now, given the world we live in and given the evolution of our consciousness? What is ours to do?
I think that's exactly where my heart is around this question, Wendy, is that Charles Fillmore was the perfect instrument for God to use for the work that was Charles's to do at that time. The next generation, Eric Butterworth, was the perfect man to do the work that was his to do for his time. Their work is done. They did what they were supposed to do. They did their job, and now it's our job. Who is going to step up now? And I think that whatever we're going to do as a movement, whatever we're going to do to ensure the growth, the health, the becoming of the movement, we're not going to get there by looking backward. That's not the way. We stand on the work that came before. We stand on the shoulders of giants, absolutely. But if we're to bring a vitality and energy, a nowness, it's now, it's us. The fact that I am here shows me that the soul had need of an organ. Shall I not assume the post?
Thanks. I think they'd be doing what we're doing, which is learning and listening and doing what they can and acknowledging how they might have made mistakes in the past.
You know, Ellen, forward. I really want to acknowledge you and Jim Blake and the whole team at Unity World Headquarters for having this conversation, because I remember in our rehearsal, as we were going through the principles and laying out the flow for this evening, that then we, as colleagues and friends, started talking about what are we doing? And we knew that there could be some risk. You knew there could be some risk in having this conversation. And I applaud you and everyone that has allowed us to be in this conversation tonight, because if we can't have it as New Thought ministers, I don't know who can. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. We're just about out of time, in fact. Thank you all for being here. Do you have final thoughts, Sheila, Michael, to leave with the viewers?
My final thought would be, just remember who you are. I asked the Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman once to boil down the teaching. And if there was one nugget, what would it be? And she didn't answer right away. We were in a meeting, we were on a break. And when we went to lunch later, I sat next to her for lunch, and she just turned to me and she said, know who you are. Know who you are. So I would say to you, during these times are God's times. God hasn't gone anywhere. The goodness of God is still available. You are still divine. You still get to decide what you will entertain in your mind and in your heart, because as you think, so it will be in your life, as Proverbs says. You get to meditate on what is the truth. You get to meditate on your own well-being and being in conscious union with that which made you in the very beginning. All of that is yours to do. Know who you are and know the power, the ability, and the capabilities that are wired within you, that are your birthright, your inheritance, your spiritual inheritance, and never let them go, no matter the experience you may walk through. I'll remind you, Psalm 23 says, yea, though I walk through the valley and the shadow of death, debt, fear, the unknown, racism, sexism, all kinds of discrimination, whatever I walk through, but I don't build a mailbox there. I don't hang a hammock and start swinging there. We're just passing through. And so, yea, though I walk through the valley and shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Fear is the culprit. It makes us act less than divine. Fear is the culprit. Be not afraid. I am with you always. So I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And so wherever I am, the presence, the power, and the love of God is, wherever you are, that presence is there. Remember to turn to it again and again. When you're in the midst of those experiences, turn to the presence and say, here I am. What's next? What's my assignment? Why am I here? And allow the presence to guide you and to lead you in the way that is best for you and the highest way for you and all concerned. Know it. Know who you are.
Thank you. Michael?
Find your people. We don't have to do this alone. Find your tribe, find your community. And we're finding our community right now is not just local, because we can't meet locally very much. So you'll find your people, you'll find your connection, but none of us does this alone.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, and that's the perfect segue into what's next, because you all may be wondering, so what is yours to do? There have been lots of resources shared in the chat box. You'll get more tomorrow in the email, and it'll answer some of the questions that you asked, like where to listen to Reverend Sheila, or how to be part of what Wendy and Michael are doing in their churches. It will also answer what Unity Headquarters is doing in terms of social action. And we've added some books and articles to that page, some that we wrote, some that we recommend. And the recording of this event will be on that page. I can't believe the time has gone so fast. You all have been wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We knew that would happen. And thanks for joining us. Watch for more Unity online events, and we will see you then.